Bafroman 101 says, boys, curious in your thoughts on bodybuilding, especially natural, and how you'd approach programming for it. Uh, Bodybuilding, if you're asking like my opinion on it, it's not like my chosen sport, but it's quite interesting in where it's quite similar to powerlifting and weightlifting, where a lot of the concepts in bodybuilding are taken on by athletes. They're taken on in multiple different sports, so track and field athletes, uh, strength sport athletes, field sports athletes, all these different groups look heavily at bodybuilding for certain aspects of their training. So a lot of the time when you're looking at bodybuilding and bodybuilder training, um, there's two areas of particular focus that are very, very valuable for everybody else. The first area obviously is hypertrophy, so them gaining muscle size, gaining cross-sectional area within the muscle, making themselves bigger, so then they can go on to make themselves stronger, more powerful, and faster. Then the second area is modulation of body size and body composition, which obviously is hugely important for almost every athlete. In my opinion, the sport of bodybuilding has some flaws in it, as most sports do. One of the bigger areas that I kind of see the flaw with bodybuilding is in the kind of qualitative aspect of, I think this person looks better versus Gerf might think that person looks better. It's hard when there's no real objective measurement of what success looks like. I think also in bodybuilding, there's, as with other sports, there's massive amounts of genetic elitism, and unless you're born with abs that tend to stack in a certain direction, where you have really, really well defined different groupings within the abs, unless you have a propensity to gain muscle quite easily, a propensity to, or a natural inclination towards lower body fat percentage, bodybuilding is an incredibly difficult sport for you, not only to get started in, but for you to be successful in. And I think you see a lot of people kind of start off down the bodybuilding road, and they'll end up going from bodybuilding where they think they want to be a competition bodybuilder to then going bodybuilding where they might want to be a physique competitor or a natural physique competitor. And then a lot of the time we inevitably see people drifting off into the areas of powerlifting, CrossFit, weightlifting, all these separate areas where they'll look for just a slightly different challenge. But I think bodybuilding, we have a lot to owe bodybuilders, in terms of not only looking into hypertrophy and the other area of kind of body weight control and body composition control, but also bodybuilders have been obviously experimenting with a huge amount of other stuff for many, many, many years. And that kind of knowledge comes over into high performance sports then on top of that as well. So I people like to rag on bodybuilders. It takes a huge amount of commitment, takes a huge amount of sacrifice in almost every area of your life to be very, very good at bodybuilding. So I certainly wouldn't rag on it too much. It's not for me. It's not the sport I'd like to kind of put a huge amount of time or commitment or sacrifice into. But certainly bodybuilding is an important area of study. I'm very, very glad people have put their entire lives into bodybuilding, and kind of made the mistakes so we don't have to make them.
Of doing bodybuilding. I think in terms of not natural bodybuilding, I think it's thought to the moment. It's crazy how many younger people are dying. So like Boston Lloyd died recently. He was 29. There was an Irish gentleman, Scott Murray. I'm not sure what age he was, but I'm almost certain he was in his 20s, if not early 20s. Now, we don't know if he was using performance-enhancing drugs, but he was still part of the bodybuilding culture. You know, I think you can lump people into bodybuilding even if they're not competing. So like physique-orientated people, so extreme physiques are their priority. I think for the vast majority of people who do bodybuilding, it's a positive impact in their life. It's a healthier lifestyle, regular exercise, trying to pursue mastery of a discipline, friends and family and stuff they encounter along the way. You know, there's a lot of benefits to natural or unnatural bodybuilding. But I think as well, then there's kind of a darker side to it. You know, we were literally talking to a very high level athlete recently who used to do bodybuilding, especially female athletes, who said they developed a very poor relationship with food. And you'll hear this a lot from former kind of bikini-esque or physique-orientated female bodybuilders. They'll end up with a very poor relationship with food after, and it's something they'll talk about taking a very, very long time for them to adjust to back to normal. So you definitely see lads have certainly developed eating disorders as well, but credence or credit goes to the female population of bodybuilding or post-female bodybuilding, as they'll talk about it a lot more, and they'll talk about how their relationship with food was terrible for a period of time when they were primarily competing in bodybuilding. You don't see that as much as men. Now, I don't know if the prevalence of the eating disorders is as much because you don't see men ever talking about it. That doesn't mean it's not present, and I would warrant it's definitely present in different manners, but you just see the female population in bodybuilding talk about it a lot more. It's definitely something that is kind of not traumatic, but it's definitely kind of sad to see. Is it something that is can be very life-altering and in a very insidious way of ruining your life using those kind of poor habits. That's not bodybuilding's fault. That's the person who engaged with bodybuilding and maybe the people they got advice from in bodybuilding's fault, but it's not necessarily bodybuilding's issue as a thing, you know. It's just the younger athletes at the moment taking incredible amounts of performance enhancing drugs. Now, there's a lot of them in their kind of 30s and 40s who die as well. And that's not so much the drugs' fault, but primarily the massive amounts of body weight they have, you know, the huge high blood pressures that they'll routinely go throughout the years. They'll be heavily in the upper limits of what, you know, their organs can sustain in terms of lean body mass. So just the amount of muscle tissue, they'll be at like 5'5", and they'll be like 140 kilos at 8% body fat or lower for a lot of the year, you know, and it's just very hard to maintain that and not expect adverse health consequences. You know, the level of drugs they have to take as well is just something that's kind of, you know, unfortunate for bodybuilding to reach a certain level. You know, there's no way around it. Like, if you want to be Mr. Olympia, then you have no choice but to take a certain minimum level of performance enhancing drugs. And this minimum level is enormous compared to like general population performance enhancing drugs. You know, if you go into any random commercial gym or any CrossFit gym, you'll be like, how much drugs are you taking? If you get an honest answer, they'll be like, I take Ostrine every day of the year. And it's like this much. And then if you got a real honest answer from one of Mr. Olympias, they'd be like, I take this much in my off season. You know, a lot of times the vast majority of them are never honest about how much they're taking. People like to lie. They like to upplay their genetics, upplay their hard work, downplay the amount of drugs they're taking to make it seem like they didn't need that much. They're like, no, I just take TRT and a little bit of insulin.
Yeah.
And I just stay at like 130 kind of low body fat. And I think there's problems with lying to people about the amount of drugs, because if someone goes ahead and takes performance enhancing drugs and they're physique orientated, they will think, fuck, if he's only taking that much and I'm half as size of him and I'm twice as fat, I'm going to have to take way more drugs. So there's a bad problem in regards to that. However, then if they said how much drugs they're actually taking, then you'd end up an issue being like, well, if that's I want to be Mr. Olympia. So that's what I got to do. You know, success leaves clues. So that's the amount of performance enhancing drugs that I have to take. So there's a lot of problems with bodybuilding. I think it's a lot of people, a lot of positives, you know, and it's been huge for the fitness industry and all the money invested in it and stuff like that. In terms of program to it, which neither of us really talked about, the programming idea is quite simple. You know, progressive overload, increasing number of reps to a certain extent. You know, you would be looking for a lot of 1RMs as a bodybuilder. You'd be using a certain amount of high weight, high rep compound exercises, but maybe to half the extent you'd see of someone, you know, one of our athletes in weightlifting or one of our track and field athletes or rugby players. You know, you'd see the actual exercises would be quite similar to a certain extent. There wouldn't be a massive deviation, but the volume spread across those. So, you know, there'll be a lot of squatting and benching, for example, but there'll be a lot more volume of other exercises compared to the assistance work we'd see for our sports athletes, for example, whatever you want to call them. And so you just be looking for progressive overload. You probably wouldn't really be straying down below 5 or 6 reps in most parts. You would still be staying, rather than cycling through like 10s, 6s, 3s, 2s, and 1s, you'd probably be cycling through like 12s, 10s, 8s, maybe 6s, but probably not that low. And you just go 12s, 10s, 8s, a little bit heavier weight again at the 12s, 10s, 8s, and then you'd be looking at manipulating the body weight. Where do you need to go? Are you going down towards a competition, or are you in the off season and you need to progressively gain some weight, then you'll be monitoring body fat levels, you'll be monitoring those other metrics, sleep, blood pressure, even especially for your natural athletes, and you just be slowly working up and trying to gain as much lean tissue as possible without gaining excess fat. So the principle is simple, but the putting into practice takes a lot of due diligence.
The last thing I'd say on bodybuilding, and it's something I definitely come up with a lot when I owned the gym and I was coaching people in person an awful lot more, is bodybuilding has a massive issue with people's expectations or people's thoughts about where they can get to. And this has gotten so much worse than when we kind of started training. People are used to now picking up their phone, going on Instagram. They'll follow like a fitness influencer. That guy or girl will be in phenomenal shape, and they'll put up posts all year round of them being in phenomenal shape. And I think people downplay how out of the ordinary that is, or how unachievable that is for the vast majority of people. People being over 100 kilos or 110 kilos with visible abs all year round, you're either genetically massively predisposed to that, and without any diet or training, you're probably going to sit pretty close to that anyway, or else you're massively enhancing your ability to hold that body shape, size, and composition. And I think that is, if the health concerns and the dietary concerns and all of that is a major issue with bodybuilding from the actual logistical side of things and the danger side of things, I think in terms of like a slightly more soft-sided thing of why people aren't going to get on very well with bodybuilding, particularly natural bodybuilding or amateur level bodybuilding, is that the idea of what's achievable for the vast majority of people is just completely skewed. You know, unless you're 16 to 19 years old, you have quite good genetics, you have somewhat of an athletic background, and you're being helped along the way, like those physiques probably aren't achievable for most people. Certainly if you have a full-time job and you have a family or a kid or other responsibilities going on in the background and you can't control every aspect of it. I think for most people, the Ross Edgley style physique just isn't going to be doable on normal protocols, normal diet, normal training, unless you're a freak and you have some other stuff.
I know we've been talking about this for a good few minutes, but no one ever asks about bodybuilding, and there's obviously a lot of thoughts on it. But that's the great point, is that a lot of times you'll see, so we're going to lump these physique people in, these influencers, with bodybuilding. So we'll just say not even bodybuilding, but physique orientated bodybuilding, the act of bodybuilding. The physiques they will have are not necessarily impossible to achieve by a lot of people who are natural, but the vast majority of those did not achieve it through the use of natural means. And it does skew men's kind of perception of what is possible, or what is possible with a certain amount of genetics and work, you know. So it skews everyone every which way. Like the amount of people you'll see in just commercial gyms who take performance-enhancing drugs for physique, you know, and as we always talk about, we know we don't have any problem with that, and we don't literally doesn't bother.
None of our business.
None of our business, absolutely. But I think it does skew. So in the same way we see a lot of females talking about having issues from eating disorders from bodybuilding, I think you'd see a lot more men talking about how they might not be comfortable with their physique, especially men who didn't do a lot of sports when they were younger and they get to their 20s and they're not physically in good shape. They don't feel great about themselves. And then they look at these influencers, are like, okay, these are the pinnacle, so maybe someday I might look like them. But then they go into their commercial gym and they see loads of lads who are in phenomenal shape who also use performance-enhancing drugs. Now, the argument to that is those lads don't have any obligation to tell anyone that they're on performance-enhancing drugs. The average Joe Schmo doesn't need to tell randomers in the gym. But it's funny how that's the direction it's gone, and these lads will come into the gym and they'll be, you know, muffin top, skinny fat, not strong, not confident in the gym because they're not used to it. And they look at these lads' physiques and they'll be like 18-year-olds who are absolutely shredded, like just fucking feathers.
And jacked too.
Feathers on their delts and triceps, you know, and they're just taking a lot of SARMs. And again, it's not their responsibility to tell anyone. But it's funny how the whole perception gets more skewed every year. I'm absolutely certain that the amount of amateur performance-enhancing drug users just goes up massively every year. So it's is it a bad thing? Probably overall, it's probably not great. But then overall, there's a lot of people going to the gym more than ever. So
who knows?
Bathroom man, that's a very lengthy answer to the question, but we never talk about this.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of thoughts.